The stagecoach wheel caught another rut, jolting Clara May Rowan against the wooden frame. She pressed her gloved hand to the window, watching the Wyoming landscape blur past in sheets of white. Snow had begun falling an hour ago, gentle at first, now coming down in earnest. The driver shouted something to the horses that got swallowed by the wind. Clara pulled her woolen shawl tighter. 3 days of travel from Denver. 3 days of her uncle's instructions rattling in her head like loose coins. Mr. Cornelius Ashford owns half the silver mines in Hollow Rock. He's 48, respectable, established. You'll want for nothing. Want for nothing. Clara had wanted to stay in Denver, wanted to keep her position at the millinery shop, wanted to choose her own path. But Uncle Theodore had made it clear she was 23, unmarried, and living under his roof meant living under his rules. The arrangement with Mr. Ashford had been settled through letters. A photograph had been sent. Terms agreed upon. The stagecoach lurched to a stop. Through the frost-covered window, Clara could make out the dim shapes of buildings. Hollow Rock, Wyoming Territory. Population 342. According to the last census, 343 now, she supposed. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, already tossing her trunk into the snow. Clara gathered her skirts and climbed down, her boots sinking into the fresh powder. The wind hit her like a physical thing, stealing her breath and sending her bonnet strings whipping around her face. Main Street stretched before her, a collection of weathered storefronts, their windows glowing amber in the gathering dusk. The Imperial Hotel sat on the corner, its painted sign swaying on rusty chains. She dragged her trunk through the snow toward the hotel entrance. Inside, warmth hit her face, along with the smell of wood smoke, leather, and something that might have been stew. A handful of men sat around tables, playing cards or nursing drinks. Their conversation died as she entered. The clerk behind the desk, a thin man with pomaded hair, looked up from his ledger. "Help you, miss? I'm looking for Mr. Cornelius Ashford. I'm expected." Clara kept her voice steady, though her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves. The clerk's expression shifted something between surprise and discomfort. He glanced at the men at the tables, then back to her. "Ashford, you say?" "Yes, I'm Miss Clara Rowan, from Denver. There should have been correspondence about my arrival." "Ah." The clerk closed his ledger slowly. "Well now, miss, there's been a development. Mr. Ashford, that is to say..." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Ashford took himself a wife last Tuesday. Local widow, Mrs. Harriet Clemens. Quite sudden, it was." The floor seemed to tilt under Clara's feet. "I don't understand." "Seems he decided on a change of plans. These things happen." The clerk wouldn't meet her eyes. Clara gripped the edge of the desk. 3 days' travel. Her position at the millinery given to another girl. Her few belongings sold to pay for the journey. But there was an agreement. Letters were exchanged. "Can't speak to that. Miss, only know what is." The clerk drummed his fingers on the ledger. "Storm's getting worse. You'll be wanting a room for the night. I expect..." Yes, of course." Clara reached for her purse. "That'll be $2, in advance." Clara's fingers found only coin 67 cents, counted carefully to last until she was settled in her new home. Her new home with Mr. Ashford, who had married someone else last Tuesday. I'll need to make arrangements. Perhaps Mr. Ashford could..." "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford left for Colorado Springs this morning. Honeymoon trip." The clerk's tone had gone flat. $2. "Miss, storm's getting worse, and we're near full up." The men at the tables had resumed their card games, but Clara felt their awareness like heat on her back. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the panes. "I have 67 cents, she said quietly. "Perhaps I could work for the difference. I'm skilled with needle and thread." I could mend. This ain't a charity house. The clerk's thin mouth pressed thinner. Pardon my saying so, miss, but young ladies traveling alone, arriving to meet men they ain't married to well, we run a respectable establishment. The words hit like cold water. Clara straightened her spine, lifting her chin the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her. I see. She turned and walked back into the storm, dragging her trunk behind her. The snow had thickened, turning the street into a tunnel of white. She tried the mercantile closed. The restaurant, the owner's wife took one look at her and shook her head. Even the church doors were barred against the wind. By the time Clara reached the edge of town, her skirts were soaked through, ice forming in the folds. Her trunk had become impossible to drag. She left it beside a fence post, keeping only her small carpet bag with her few personal things. The cold had moved past her clothing, past her skin, settling into her bones. A shape loomed through the snow, a stable or barn, doors hanging ajar. Clara stumbled toward it, her numb fingers fumbling with the latch. Inside, the air was marginally warmer, thick with the smell of old hay and horses that were no longer there. Empty stalls stretched into darkness. Clara found a corner where loose hay had been piled, probably forgotten by whoever had last used this place. She sank down, pulling her wet skirts around her. The barn walls groaned under the wind's assault, snow filtering through gaps in the boards. She thought of Uncle Theodore's parlor, the letter arriving from Wyoming, his satisfaction as he'd explained the arrangement. A man of substance. He'd said, "You should be grateful." Grateful? Clara pressed her back against the rough wooden wall and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, when the storm passed, she would find work. Any work. She would not wire her uncle for help, would not return to Denver in shame. She had 67 cents, a carpetbag of belongings, and her mother's stubborn pride. The wind screamed through the rafters, and somewhere in the darkness, a loose board banged against its frame like a irregular heartbeat. Clara pulled her damp shawl over her head and settled in to wait for morning, or freezing, whichever came first. In Hollow Rock, Wyoming territory, population 342. No one wondered about the young woman who'd stepped off the evening stage. No one mentioned Cornelius Ashford's sudden marriage to the widow Clemens, or the letters from Denver that had stopped arriving. And certainly, no one ventured out into the storm to check the old abandoned stable at the north end of town, where the hay still held the faintest memory of warmth, and a woman sat with her back straight and her pride intact, facing down the longest night of her life. Clara woke to the sound of hinges creaking. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was, then the cold rushed back, along with the ache in her shoulders from sleeping propped against the barn wall. Gray morning light filtered through the gaps in the boards. The storm had quieted to a whisper. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long duster coat that had seen better years. He held a bridle in one hand, and he'd stopped mid-step, clearly not expecting to find anyone here. Clara's fingers fumbled for her carpetbag, though what she planned to do with it, she couldn't say. Her voice came out as a croak. I mean no harm. The storm. The man stepped inside, closing the door behind him. As her eyes adjusted, Clara could make out more details: dark hair that needed cutting, several days' worth of stubble, clothes that spoke of hard use but careful maintenance. He moved to one of the empty stalls and hung the bridle on a nail, his movements unhurried. Storm was something fierce, he said finally. His voice was low, gravelly, like he didn't use it much. You been here all night? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Her throat felt raw, whether from cold or unshed tears. She couldn't tell. The man studied her for a long moment. Clara waited for the questions. Who was she? What was she doing here? Why was a woman alone in an abandoned stable instead? He began unbuttoning his coat. No. The word came out sharper than Clara intended. I'm fine. He paused, hands still on the buttons. Temperature dropped below freezing last night. You're shaking hard enough to rattle the rafters." It was true. Clara hadn't realized how violently she was shivering until he mentioned it. Her wet clothes had frozen stiff during the night, and she could no longer feel her feet. The man finished removing his coat, heavy wool lined with flannel. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and held it out. When Clara didn't take it, he simply draped it over her shoulders, stepping back immediately. The warmth was instant, overwhelming. The coat smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else horses, maybe, or just the indefinable scent of someone who spent their days outside. It was far too large, the sleeves hanging past her hands. But Clara had never felt anything so welcome. "I'll be back when the wind dies down proper," the man said, already moving toward the door. "Don't try to sleep in this cold. Miss, just don't." "Wait!" Clara struggled to stand, her frozen skirts crackling. "Your coat. Got another at home." He paused at the door, glancing back. In the pale morning light, she could see his face clearly for the first time, weathered, angular, with eyes the color of winter sky. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something steady about him, something that made her believe he meant what he said. "Why?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. He considered this, one hand on the door. "Way I see it, a person's got enough troubles without adding freezing to the list." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that might have been mocking from another man, but seemed merely polite from him. "Like I said, I'll be back." Then he was gone, leaving Clara wrapped in a stranger's coat, wondering if she'd dreamed the whole encounter. But the warmth was real, seeping into her frozen bones. She sank back down into the hay, pulling the coat tighter. Time passed strangely in the barn. Clara dozed fitfully. Startling awake at every sound, the wind had indeed died down, leaving an expectant quiet. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see snow-covered fields stretching toward the mountains. True to his word, the man returned as the sun reached its zenith. This time he led a horse, a sturdy bay mare with a white blaze. He also carried a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Can you ride?" he asked without preamble. Clara nodded. Her father had kept horses, before the bad investments, before the illness. "Good." He set the bundle on an overturned barrel and unwrapped it a chunk of bread, only slightly stale, and a tin cup of something that steamed in the cold air. "Coffee's not much, but it's hot." Clara's hands shook as she reached for the cup. The coffee was bitter, overboiled, possibly the worst she'd ever tasted. She drank it anyway, feeling it burn all the way down. "Thank you," she managed between sips. "Mr. Weston Hale." He busied himself checking the mare's girth, not looking at her. "You got somewhere to go?" The question she'd been dreading. Clara set down the empty cup carefully. "I'll find something. In town. I'm good with a needle. I can—" Town folk already made their position clear. "I'm thinking—" It wasn't a question. Weston's tone remained neutral, but something in the set of his shoulders suggested he knew exactly why a young woman would be sleeping in an abandoned barn. Clara's cheeks burned despite the cold. "I have money. Not much, but—" "Not offering charity?" Weston finally turned to face her. "Got a place north of here. Nothing fancy, couple rooms. Wood stove that works most days. Could use someone who's good with a needle. Gear needs mending constant, and I'm about as useful with thread as a bull in a church." Clara studied his face, looking for the catch. There was always a catch. "In exchange for what?" "Mending. Maybe some cooking if you're inclined. Though I manage well enough on my own." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I work the mountain trail, moving cattle for the ranches. Gone days at a time. You'd have the place mostly to yourself." "And when you're there—" Weston's expression didn't change. "When I'm there, I'm usually too tired to be much trouble to anyone." He moved to help her stand, careful not to touch more than her elbow. "Storm's building again. We go now, or you spend another night here. Your choice." Clara looked around the barn at the moldy hay, the gaps in the walls, the emptiness of it. Then she looked at Weston Hale, who'd asked nothing about her circumstances, who'd given her his coat without expectation, who offered shelter in exchange for honest work. "All right," she said. He helped her onto the mare, then swung up behind her. Clara tensed at the necessary closeness, but Weston kept space between them as much as possible, his touch impersonal as he reached around her for the reins. They rode in silence through the snow-muffled landscape. Clara caught glimpses of the town in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, life going on without her. She turned her face forward. The cabin appeared after an hour's ride, a low structure of logs and chinking, with a lean-to attached and what might have been a chicken coop, though no chickens were in evidence. Smoke drifted from the chimney, promising warmth. "It's not much," Weston said as he helped her down. It wasn't, but the door was solid, the roof looked sound, and no one would turn her away for having only 67 cents. "It's enough," Clara said, and meant it. Weston nodded, leading the mare to the lean-to. Over his shoulder, he added, "There's stew on the stove. Help yourself. I'll bring your trunk tomorrow. Saw it by the fence post." Clara's throat tightened. She'd assumed the trunk was lost. One more thing taken by the storm and the indifference of strangers. But this man, this taciturn cowboy, who offered his coat to strangers, had noticed, had remembered. "Mr. Hale." Just Weston. He didn't turn around, busy with the horse. "And you'd be—" "Clara May Rowan." "Well then, Miss Clara, welcome to nowhere in particular." As Clara pushed open the cabin door and stepped into warmth that smelled of wood smoke and simmering stew, she thought that nowhere in particular might be exactly where she needed to be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cabin floor when Clara heard the horse approaching. She'd been awake since dawn, having spent her first night in a real bed after 2 days of uncertainty. The narrow cot in the corner wasn't much, but compared to the barn floor, it felt like luxury. Weston appeared in the doorway, her trunk balanced on one shoulder. He set it down carefully near the wall, brushing snow from his coat. 2 dogs followed him in mongrels of indeterminate breeding, all legs and eager tails. "That's Buck and Josie," he said as the dogs investigated Clara with enthusiastic sniffing. "They mostly mind their manners." Clara extended her hand, letting them smell her fingers. Buck, the larger of the 2, immediately tried to climb into her lap despite weighing at least 40 pounds. "Buck, down!" Weston's voice carried quiet authority. The dog obeyed, though his tail never stopped wagging. "Coffee's hot if you want some." They sat at the rough wooden table, cups between them. Clara had already explored the cabin in daylight. 2 rooms, sparse but clean. The main room held the stove, table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. The second room was Weston's, the door firmly closed. Her corner had been arranged with surprising thoughtfulness: the cot, a small table, and a curtain strung on rope for privacy. "I can start on the mending today," Clara offered, "if you'll show me what needs doing." Weston nodded toward a pile in the corner she hadn't noticed before. "Leather goods mostly, reins, saddlebags, some shirts. Take your time getting settled first." "I'd rather work." The words came out more forcefully than intended. Clara softened her tone. "I mean, I'd like to be useful." "Suit yourself." Weston stood, downing the last of his coffee. "I'll be checking the fence lines today. There's salt pork in the larder, beans soaking for supper." He paused at the door. "You need anything from town?" Clara thought of the faces at the hotel, the closed doors. "No, thank you." After he left, Clara unpacked her trunk. Her few dresses were wrinkled but intact. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, lay her mother's sewing kit, silver scissors, ivory thimble, needles in a velvet case. The familiar weight of them in her hands made her throat tight. She turned to the mending pile. The damage told stories: tears from barbed wire, worn places from hard use, burns from campfires. Clara sorted them methodically, leatherwork first, then fabric. Her fingers found their rhythm quickly, the familiar motions soothing. By the time Weston returned at dusk, she'd repaired 3 sets of reins and started on a saddlebag with a torn seam. He stopped in the doorway, watching her work. "You weren't exaggerating about the needle skills." "My mother taught me." Clara didn't look up from her stitching. "She took in piecework when times were lean." Weston moved to the stove, adding wood. "That saddlebag's been sitting there 6 months. Kept meaning to take it to town, find someone to fix it. The leather's good quality, worth maintaining." Clara held up the bag, examining her work critically. Though whoever owned this was hard on their gear. "That would be me." A ghost of a smile crossed Weston's face. "Never did learn to pack light." They ate supper in comfortable silence, beans and salt pork, as promised. With bread Weston had baked that morning, it was simple fare. But Clara had learned the value of a hot meal. "I can cook," she said as they cleared the dishes. "If you'll let me. My mother—" She stopped, annoyed at herself for mentioning her mother again. "Kitchen's yours if you want it." Weston pumped water into the wash basin. "Though I should warn you, the stove's temperamental. Sometimes it decides to smoke for no earthly reason." As if to prove his point, a puff of smoke escaped the chimney pipe. Clara laughed a small sound, but the first genuine laugh she'd managed in days. Over the following days, they developed a routine. Weston left early to tend his work checking cattle, mending fences, the dozen tasks that kept a man busy in winter. Clara organized the cabin, creating order from bachelor chaos. She mended during the day, the pile steadily shrinking. In the evenings, they shared the main room. Weston would clean tack or sharpen tools while Clara sewed. Sometimes he'd tell her about the ranches he worked for, the peculiarities of different cattle breeds, the best trails through the mountains. His voice had a rhythm to it, low and steady, filling the silence without demanding response. One evening, a week into their arrangement, Clara found a shirt in the mending pile that made her pause. The fabric was finer than the others, the cut more careful. It had been white once, though wear and weather had aged it to cream. The collar was torn nearly through. "This is different from the others," she said, holding it up. Weston glanced over from where he was oiling a bridle. Something flickered across his face. "My mother made that long time back. The needlework is excellent." Clara examined the seams, the small, even stitches. She was skilled. She was. Weston's hand stilled on the leather. "Took in sewing, like yours did. Townfolk were happy enough to hire her, until they decided they weren't." Clara waited, not pressing. She'd learned that Weston would share in his own time or not at all. "My father ran freight wagons," he continued finally. "Gone for weeks at a time. When he died accident on the mountain road, Ma tried to keep us going with her needle money. But a widow with a young son, no family name that mattered." He shrugged. "Townfolk have their ways." "What happened to her?" "Took sick one winter. I was 14, old enough to hire out, but not enough saved for a doctor." His voice remained steady, matter of fact. "She's buried on the hill behind the church. They gave her that much, at least." Clara bent back to the shirt, her vision blurring slightly. She understood now why he'd helped her, why he'd offered shelter without questions. He'd seen his mother in her, a woman with skill but no standing, at the mercy of those who measured worth in different currency. "I can fix this," she said quietly. "The collar, I can make it like new." "Appreciate that." They returned to their tasks, but something had shifted in the silence. It felt less like the space between strangers and more like understanding. Later, as Clara worked by lamplight to repair the delicate collar, She thought about the threads that connected people, some visible, like the ones under her needle, others invisible but no less real. She thought about Weston's mother, sewing by similar light, and her own mother, fingers flying over fabric to keep them fed. When she finished, the shirt looked almost new. She folded it carefully and set it aside, a small restoration in a world that broke things casually. Weston found it in the morning, held it up to the light. He didn't speak, but the way he ran his fingers over the repaired collar said enough. He hung it on a peg by his door, not to wear, Clara suspected, but to keep. That evening, a pot of tea appeared on the table while Clara sewed. Weston didn't mention it, just poured 2 cups and returned to his work. But Clara understood the gesture, not charity, not payment, but acknowledgement. 2 people who knew what it meant to lose, sharing warmth against the cold. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin, with dogs at their feet and lamplight pushing back the dark, it felt almost like home. Clara had been at the cabin for 2 weeks when she first noticed the pile of worn saddles in the lean-to. Ancient things, leather cracked and stitching pulled loose. They looked more like relics than working equipment. "Those need attention too," she asked Weston one morning, gesturing toward the heap. He glanced over from where he was checking his rifle. "Those are past saving. Mostly, keep meaning to haul them off." Clara walked over and examined the top saddle. The leather was dry but not rotted. The tree still sound beneath the damaged exterior. "The bones are good, they just need care. Take more than needle and thread to fix those." "I know leather work." Clara ran her hand over a particularly deep crack. "My father dealt in hides before things changed. I learned a bit." Weston studied her with that steady gaze she'd grown accustomed to. "You're welcome to try. If you've a mind to, there's Neat's foot oil in the shed. Some leather scraps somewhere." That afternoon, while Weston was out checking his trap lines, Clara hauled one of the better saddles inside. She cleaned it first, working months of dirt from the leather. Then came the oil, applied in thin coats, coaxing flexibility back into the hide. The torn stitching would need complete replacement, but she could see the saddle's potential emerging. Buck and Josie watched from their spot by the stove, heads tilted with canine curiosity. "Don't look at me like that," Clara told them. "Honest work never hurt anyone." She was still working when Weston returned at dusk, snow dusting his shoulders. He stopped just inside the door, taking in the scene. Clara surrounded by leather pieces, her sleeves rolled up, a smudge of oil across her cheek. "Making progress," he observed. "It's good leather. Shame to waste it." Clara didn't look up from the strap she was cutting, though whoever owned this had peculiar ideas about saddle maintenance. "That would be me again." Weston hung his coat on the peg. "Bought that lot at auction 5 years back. Previous owner died, and his widow sold everything for traveling money. You never used them. Never needed to. Have my own working saddles. Just seemed wrong to let them go for scrap." He moved to the stove, adding wood. "Suppose I'm sentimental about things that can still be useful." Clara heard the weight behind those words, understood he wasn't just talking about saddles. She bent back to her work, cutting the last piece needed for repair. They developed a new routine. Mornings, Clara tended the household tasks and worked on regular mending. Afternoons, she restored saddles. Weston began bringing back better materials from town, proper leather for patches, stronger thread, new buckles to replace rusted ones. "Trading pelts," he explained when Clara questioned the expense. "Trapper owed me a favor." One evening, 3 weeks into their arrangement, Clara was struggling with a particularly stubborn piece of leather when Weston set down his coffee and came to look. "Here," he said, taking the awl from her hands. "Angle it like this. Let the tool do the work." He demonstrated, his large hands surprisingly deft. Clara watched, noting the technique. When he handed the awl back, their fingers brushed briefly. Both pulled away quickly. Clara focusing intently on the leather while Weston returned to his chair. But he stayed close that evening, occasionally offering advice or holding a piece steady while she worked. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the lamplight creating a circle that held them both. "Why do you help me?" Clara asked suddenly. She'd been wondering for weeks, the question building behind her teeth. Weston was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You don't ask for anything. Just work. Make things better instead of complaining they're broken." He paused. "Rare quality. I'm in your home, eating your food, earning both." His voice carried finality. "That saddle you're working on could sell for $20 in town. Finished proper. You've more than paid your way." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't know." "Didn't figure you did. That's part of why." Weston stood abruptly. "Moon's bright tonight. Good for checking the upper trap line. Might be gone till late." After he left, Clara sat with the half-mended saddle in her lap, understanding settling over her like a blanket. He wasn't keeping her here out of pity. In his mind, it was a fair exchange, her skills for shelter, both parties benefiting. The knot in her chest, the one that tightened every time she ate his food or warmed herself by his fire, began to loosen. She worked until her fingers ached, finishing the saddle just as the clock struck midnight. It sat on the table like a resurrection supple leather gleaming with oil. New stitching, straight and strong. Her mother would have been proud. Weston still hadn't returned. Clara banked the fire and prepared for bed, but sleep wouldn't come. She found herself listening for horse hooves, telling herself it was only because the night was so quiet. When he finally came in near dawn, moving quietly so as not to wake her, Clara pretended to sleep. Through barely open eyes, she saw him stop at the table, run his hand over the completed saddle. He stood there for a long moment, then did something that made her breath catch. He pulled a blanket from the shelf and draped it over her shoulders, adjusting it carefully to cover her completely. His hand lingered for just a second near her hair, not quite touching. Then he was gone, closing his bedroom door with barely a sound. Clara lay still, the blanket warm around her, her heart beating strangely fast. She thought about that almost touch, about the careful way he'd covered her, about how different this was from what she'd expected when Uncle Theodore arranged her marriage to a stranger. That had been about ownership, transaction, a problem solved. This, whatever this was, felt like something else entirely. Two people circling each other carefully, building trust through small gestures and shared silence. She pulled the blanket tighter and finally slept, dreaming of leather and lamplight and hands that knew how to fix broken things. In the morning, a cup of hot coffee waited on the table beside her completed saddle. Next to it, a note in Weston's careful script. "Fine work. There's a rancher might buy this. Your choice." Clara traced the words with one finger. Her choice. After weeks of having no choices, of being moved like a chess piece across the board of other people's decisions, those two words felt like wealth. She dressed quickly and found Weston in the lean-to, examining another of the old saddles. "I'd like to finish them all," she said, "if you don't mind." He looked up, and she caught something unguarded in his expression before his usual reserve returned. "Don't mind at all." They carried the saddle inside together, working in companionable silence to set up her workspace. And if their hands touched again, reaching for the same tool, neither of them pulled away quite as quickly as before. Clara's first trip to Hollow Rock came on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after Weston had found her in the barn. She needed proper needles for the heavier leather work, and the small sewing kit from her mother wasn't sufficient for the task. "I can go," Weston offered as she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. "Save you the trouble." "I need to select them myself." Clara kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her hair. "Different weights for different work. I'll know them when I see them." Weston studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Take the mare. She knows the way." The ride into town felt longer than she remembered. When the first buildings came into view, Clara's chest tightened, but she kept her back straight. Her mother's voice in her head, dignity costs nothing and pays dividends. The Mercantile sat on Main Street, its windows dusty but intact. Clara tied the mare to the post and entered, a bell jingling overhead. The proprietor, a thin man with wire spectacles, looked up from his ledger. His expression shifted when he recognized her, or rather, when he recognized what she represented. "Help you," the words came out clipped, unfriendly. "I need leather needles, various sizes." Clara moved to the notions counter, ignoring the way he watched her like she might steal something. Two women near the fabric bolts whispered behind their hands. Clara caught fragments, "Cowboy's woman, living in sin, shameless." Her cheeks burned, but she kept her attention on the needles, selecting carefully. "That'll be 40 cents. The proprietor's tone suggested he'd rather not take her money at all. Clara paid without comment and turned to leave. At the door, she nearly collided with a well-dressed woman entering the shop. They recognized each other at the same moment. Mrs. Harriet Ashford, née Clemens, the woman who'd married Clara's intended. "Oh!" Mrs. Ashford's hand flew to her throat. You must be Miss Rowan." Clara kept her voice level. "Good morning, Mrs." Ashford's cheeks reddened. She was older than Clara had imagined, perhaps 35, with the soft look of someone who'd lived comfortably. "I should explain. Cornelius and I." "There's nothing to explain." Clara stepped around her. "Good day." She made it to the mare before the shaking started. Her hands fumbled with the reins, vision blurring. Behind her, she heard the shop bell ring again. Footsteps on the boardwalk. "Miss Rowan, please wait." Clara turned reluctantly. "Mrs." Ashford stood there, twisting her gloves in her hands. "I'm sorry," the older woman said quietly. "What Cornelius did wasn't right. I told him so, but he said you'd understand. Being practical-minded." Practical. Clara tasted the word like something bitter. Yes, very practical to travel 3 days for nothing. He sent money to your uncle to cover the traveling expenses. Clara's stomach turned. Of course, Uncle Theodore hadn't mentioned that in his terse telegram demanding she find work or return immediately. He'd been compensated for his trouble. Everyone had been taken care of except Clara herself. "How fortunate," she managed. "Mrs." Ashford stepped closer, lowering her voice. "People are saying things about you and that cowboy. I could speak to them. Explain." "Explain what?" Clara's controls snapped. "That I should have frozen to death rather than accept shelter. That would have been more respectable." "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." Clara swung onto the mare, not caring that it wasn't ladylike. "Save your explanations, Mrs. Ashford. I neither need nor want them." She rode out of town without looking back, but she could feel eyes watching from windows and doorways. The story would be all over Hollow Rock by nightfall, embellished with each telling. When she reached the cabin, Weston was splitting wood by the lean-to. He took one look at her face and set down the axe. "That bad?" Clara dismounted, her legs unsteady. "I met Mrs. Ashford." "Ah." Weston took the mare's reins, his fingers brushing Clara's briefly. "Get you some coffee." "I don't need—" Clara stopped, suddenly exhausted. "Yes, coffee would be good." Inside, Weston moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency. Clara sat at the table, removing her gloves finger by finger. The familiar space of the cabin, the mended saddles on their stands. Buck and Josie drowsing by the stove felt like sanctuary. "She said he sent money to my uncle," Clara said finally, "for the inconvenience." Weston set a cup before her. "Man like that probably thinks everything can be fixed with money." "Perhaps it can." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. "I should have taken his $40 and been grateful." Should you— Weston sat across from her. Way I see it, you traded a cage with golden bars for freedom with rough edges. Not everyone would make that choice, but seems to me you're not everyone. Clara looked up, meeting his steady gaze. The whole town thinks— She couldn't finish. I know what they think. His voice carried an edge she rarely heard. Same thing they thought about my mother. Doesn't make it true. Doesn't it matter what people say? Weston considered this. Depends on the people. Mrs. Henderson out at the Double Bar Ranch. She judges folks by their work. Tom Martinez at the freight office. He cares if you're honest in your dealings. Those opinions might matter. He paused. Town biddies with nothing better to do than gossip. Their words are just noise. That evening, Weston did something unprecedented. After supper, instead of settling into his usual chair, he pulled out a wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside were papers, carefully organized. Been thinking, he said, spreading them on the table. You're doing skilled work on those saddles. Seems only right to make it official. Clara leaned forward, reading bills of sale, receipts, ledger pages in Weston's careful hand. I don't understand. Simple enough. You restore the saddles, I sell them. We split the profit, 60-40 in your favor, since you're doing the skilled work. He pulled out a clean sheet of paper. Want to write it up proper. That way, if anyone asks, you're not here on charity. You're a business partner. Clara's throat tightened. Weston? Makes sense, he continued, not looking at her. I'm no good with fine work. You've got skills I don't. Fair trade. She understood what he was doing, giving her armor against the town's whispers. A business arrangement was respectable, defensible. It transformed her from kept woman to craftswoman, from charity case to partner. 60-40 is too generous, she said quietly. 50-50 is fair. 55-45, you're using your mother's tools, your learned skills. His tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. They drew up the agreement by lamplight, both signing their names at the bottom. Weston produced a stamp and seal from somewhere, making it official. When they finished, Clara held the paper like it was precious, which, in a way, it was. Thank you, she said. Weston was already clearing away the other papers. Nothing to thank me for, just good business. But later, when Clara had retired behind her curtain, she heard him in the main room, stoking the fire unnecessarily high. Through a gap in the fabric, she could see him standing by the window, looking out at the darkness. His shoulders were tense, his hand clenched at his side. She realized he was angry not at her, but for her, for the whispers and the closed doors and the judgment of people who knew nothing about survival or dignity, or the choices a person made when the world offered none. Clara lay back on her narrow cot, the signed papers safe in her trunk. Tomorrow she would start on the next saddle. In a month, perhaps 2, she'd have enough saved to rent a room in another town. Start fresh where no one knew her story. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it sat heavy in her chest, unwelcome as winter wind through a cracked window. Spring arrived slowly in Wyoming, the snow retreating in patches to reveal muddy ground beneath. Clara had been at the cabin for 3 months, and the pile of restored saddles had grown impressive. Weston had sold 2 already, bringing back the money with the same matter-of-fact manner he did everything else. $55 for the both, he'd said, placing Clara's share on the table. Henderson wants another if you can manage it. Says she's never seen finer work. Clara fingered the bills more money than she'd ever held at once. I can manage it. It was a Tuesday morning when Weston surprised her. Instead of heading out after breakfast, he remained at the table, turning his coffee cup in circles. Been thinking, he began, then stopped. Clara waited, recognizing the signs of Weston working up to something important. You need better space for working, proper light, room to spread out. I manage well enough. Could build something. Nothing fancy. He still wasn't looking at her. Lean-to off the south wall, windows for light, real workspace instead of taking over the kitchen table. Clara set down her sewing. That would be considerable work. Got the lumber, traded for it last month. Now he did look up. Unless you're planning on leaving soon. The question hung between them. Clara had enough saved now for stage fare and a month's lodging elsewhere. They both knew it, but somehow, the thought of leaving had grown complicated, tangled like thread in a poor stitch. "I have orders to fill," she said carefully. Mrs. Henderson's saddle. The harness set for the Martinez Freight Company. "So you'll stay for now?" "For now." Weston nodded and stood. "I'll start cutting boards this afternoon." The building took shape over the following weeks. Weston worked on it between his regular jobs, never rushing but steady in his progress. Sometimes Clara would look up from her sewing to find him measuring twice, cutting once, fitting boards with the same quiet precision he brought to everything. Cowboys began stopping by, ostensibly to check on orders, but really, Clara suspected, out of curiosity. The story had spread the woman who could make old leather new, who worked magic with needle and all. They were respectful, these men who lived by their own code far from town proprieties. They called her Miss Clara and removed their hats at the door. One afternoon, a younger cowboy named Jim Sawyer lingered after collecting his repaired chaps. "Fine work, Miss Clara," he said, turning his hat in his hands. "Was wondering if you might... That is, there's a dance at the Hendersons' barn come Saturday. Thought you might like to attend." Clara's needle stilled. From across the room, where Weston was installing a window frame, came the sound of hammering. It stopped. "That's kind of you, Mr. Sawyer," Clara said gently. "But I have orders to complete. Saturday's my busiest day." "Course, just thought I'd ask." Jim settled his hat and left quickly. The hammering resumed, perhaps a bit more forcefully than before. Clara bent back to her work, cheeks warm. "You could have gone," Weston said that evening over supper. "If you wanted." I told the truth. Saturday is busy. Clara didn't mention that any day would have been too busy for Jim Sawyer's attention. Besides, I doubt my presence would be welcome at the Hendersons' barn. "Sarah Henderson specifically asked if you were coming. Said to tell you she'd be pleased to see you." Clara looked up, surprised. She did. Some folks judge by what they see, not what they hear. Weston pushed beans around his plate. "Dance might be good for business." The words were casual, but Clara heard something else beneath them. "Are you suggesting I should have accepted Mr. Sawyer's invitation?" "Not suggesting anything. Your choice to make." "Yes," Clara said quietly. "It is." They finished the meal in silence, but it was the heavy kind that pressed against the walls. When Clara rose to clear the dishes, Weston stood abruptly. "Going to check the horses," he said, though he'd already checked them once. Clara watched him go, confusion and something else disappointment sitting heavy in her chest. She'd thought he understood. The workspace, the business arrangement, the quiet evenings by the fire, she'd thought they were building something, even if she couldn't name what. She was storing the cleaned dishes when she heard voices outside, Weston's low rumble and another man's higher tone. Through the window, she could see Jim Sawyer had returned, gesturing animatedly while Weston stood with arms crossed. Clara couldn't hear the words, but she saw Weston shake his head, saw Jim's face redden. The younger man took a step forward. Weston didn't move, didn't raise his voice, but something in his stance made Jim step back again. After another moment, Jim mounted his horse and rode off at a gallop. Weston stood in the yard for a long time before coming back inside. His knuckles were white where he gripped the door frame. Mr. Sawyer won't be bothering you again," he said. "What did you tell him?" Weston moved to his chair by the fire, suddenly looking tired. "Truth. That you're a respectable woman doing respectable work, and he'd best remember it." And if he doesn't, then he and I will have a longer conversation. Weston picked up the harness he'd been mending, then set it down again. I shouldn't have said you should go to the dance. I wasn't thinking clear. Clara came to sit across from him. Why did it bother you, Jim, asking? Weston was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. My mother, he said finally. After my father died, men came around. Figured a widow with a child was easy prey. She turned them all away, kept her dignity. But it wore on her, the asking, the assuming. He looked at Clara directly. I don't want that for you. The wearing down. So you warned Jim off. I suggested he think twice before treating a business partner of mine with anything less than full respect. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Might have mentioned I'm a fair hand with a rifle. Clara surprised herself by laughing. Poor Jim. He'll survive, find himself a town girl who wants what he's offering. Weston's expression grew serious again. You're not a town girl. Clara, don't know exactly what you are, but it's not that. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither seemed ready to examine. Clara stood, smoothing her skirts. I should finish Mrs. Henderson's saddle. She needs it by week's end. Clara! She turned back. Weston was looking at the fire, not at her. The workspace is almost done, but that doesn't mean... What I'm saying is, you don't need to leave. When it's finished, unless you want to. I know, Clara said softly. Good night, Weston. She worked late that night, focusing on the familiar rhythm of needle through leather. But her mind kept circling back to Weston's words, to the way he'd stood in the yard defending her honor without being asked. Through her curtain, she could hear him moving about, restless as a caged wolf. Eventually, his door closed, and the cabin settled into quiet, but Clara remained awake, stitching by lamplight, wondering when this arrangement had become something more than business, more than convenience. When exactly had Weston Hale's cabin become the place she didn't want to leave? The trouble started on a Wednesday. Clara had ridden into town for supplies, leather oil, heavy thread, and salt for the kitchen. She'd grown more confident in these trips, learning to ignore the whispers and hold her head high. But this time was different. 3 young men loitered outside the mercantile, passing a bottle between them despite the early hour. Clara recognized one Dale Morrison, son of a local rancher who fancied himself important. She attempted to pass, but they spread out, blocking her path. Well now, Dale drawled, his breath sour with whiskey. The Cowboy's woman, come to town all alone. Excuse me. Clara kept her voice level, though her heart raced. What's your hurry? Another man, stockier than Dale, grinned unpleasantly. We're just being friendly. Clara turned to go around them, but Dale caught her basket, sending her supplies scattering across the boardwalk. The leather oil bottles shattered, dark liquid spreading across the wood. Oops! Dale's laugh was ugly. Clumsy of me. Clara knelt to gather what she could salvage, her hands shaking. The men stood over her, making comments she tried not to hear. Other townspeople passed by, but no one stopped. No one helped. She was Weston Hale's woman, and that put her outside their concern. Leave her be. The voice came from behind the men. Clara looked up to see Tom Martinez, the freight office owner, standing with arms crossed. He was older, graying at the temples, with the quiet authority of a man who'd earned his respect. This ain't your business, Martinez, Dale said. But he took a step back. Made it my business when you started harassing a lady on my town street. Tom's hand rested casual-like on his belt, near the knife he always carried. You boys best move along. They grumbled, but dispersed. Dale shooting Clara a look that promised this wasn't over. Tom helped her gather the salvageable supplies. Thank you, Clara said quietly. No need for thanks. Those boys have been spoiling for trouble since the spring melt. He paused. Might want to mention this to Weston, though he should know. Clara rode home with her ruined supplies and bruised dignity. She didn't plan to tell Weston it would only cause trouble, but he took one look at her half-empty basket and oil-stained skirt and knew something had happened. "Who?" The single word came out sharp as winter wind. "It doesn't matter. Mr. Martinez helped." "Who?" "Clara." She told him, watching his face go still and dangerous. Without a word, he went to the wall and took down his gun belt, something he rarely wore. "Don't!" Clara caught his arm. "Please, it will only make things worse." "They put hands on you." "No, just words and my supplies. But I don't want—" "What, don't want me to defend you?" His eyes blazed. "That's what they count on. That decent folk won't make a fuss, won't fight back. And if you fight, what then? You think they'll respect me more because you bloodied Dale Morrison's nose?" Weston's jaw worked. "Can't just let it stand." "Yes, you can." Clara's grip on his arm tightened. "For me, please." They stood frozen for a moment, Clara's hand on his arm, Weston torn between rage and her plea. Finally, slowly, he hung the gun belt back on its peg. But the damage was done. Word spread that Clara Rowan had been hassled on Main Street, that Tom Martinez had stepped in where Weston Hale hadn't been. The story grew in the telling, as stories do. By week's end, it had become something larger, uglier. The repercussions came quietly at first. An order canceled here, a cowboy too busy to stop by there. Then, on Sunday morning, Clara woke to find her workshop vandalized, nothing destroyed, but clear signs of intrusion tools moved, leather pieces scattered, dirty boot prints across her clean floor. Worse was what they'd left behind her mother's dress, the one fine thing she'd kept, draped over her work table with the bodice torn open. The message was clear as spoken words. Clara stood in the doorway, trembling with fury more than fear. Behind her, she heard Weston's sharp intake of breath. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "I'll take you to the stage station. You can go to Denver or California or wherever you want. I'll give you money." "No." "Clara." "No." She turned to face him. "They want me gone. They want me to run. Then that's exactly what I won't do." "This is my fault. Bringing you here, letting people think—" "People think what they choose to think." Clara picked up her mother's dress, examining the damage. "This can be mended. Everything can be mended if you're patient enough." That afternoon, Clara did something that surprised even herself. She put on her best dress, the green wool that brought out her eyes, pinned her hair carefully, and walked into her workshop. She left the door open despite the cool air, and began to work on a saddle where anyone passing could see her. Cowboys still came, the ones who valued good work over town gossip. Tom Martinez brought a harness that needed repair, even Mrs. Henderson sent word that she had another commission. The decent folk, as Weston called them, made their support quiet but clear. But Dale Morrison and his friends grew bolder. They'd ride past the cabin at night, whooping and firing guns into the air. Once, Clara found a dead rabbit on her workshop step, neck twisted. Another time, obscene words painted on the fence Weston had built. Each time, Weston's control grew thinner. Clara would catch him standing at the window, fists clenched, watching the road. He took to working closer to home, finding reasons to be nearby. The easy companionship they'd built became strained with constant vigilance. It came to a head on a Thursday evening. Clara was alone. Weston had gone to help with calving at the double bar when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Dale and 4 others, dismounting at her workshop. She could have barred the door, hidden inside. Instead, Clara picked up the shotgun Weston kept by the door and walked out to meet them. "That's far enough," she called, the gun steady in her hands. Dale laughed, but uncertainly. "You even know how to use that thing?" My father hunted duck every season. I learned to shoot before I learned to sew. Clara's voice carried clear in the evening air. First man through that door loses a kneecap. Second one, I aim higher. You wouldn't dare. Clara fired into the ground at Dale's feet. Dirt exploded upward, and he jumped back with a yelp. That was your warning, she said, already reloading. Next one counts. They stood frozen. These men who'd expected fear and found steel instead. In the distance, Clara heard hoofbeats, a single rider, coming fast. Evening, gentlemen. Weston's voice was deadly calm as he rode into view. Something I can help you with? Dale found his courage again with backup arrived. Just paying a social call on your woman, Hale. Is that so? Weston dismounted slowly, his hand nowhere near his gun. Well, seems to me the lady's made it clear she's not receiving callers. A gentleman would respect that. Gentleman, Dale spat. That what you call yourself? No. Weston smiled. And it was a terrible thing. I call myself a man who keeps his word, and I give you my word now, come near this place again, and they'll find pieces of you scattered from here to Cheyenne. He said it conversationally, like discussing the weather. Something in his eyes must have convinced them he meant it. Dale blustered, but he and his friends mounted up and rode away. Weston watched until they disappeared, then turned to Clara. You all right? She was shaking now, the shotgun heavy in her hands. I would have shot him. I know. He gently took the gun from her. That's what scared them. Men like that understand threats. They don't know what to do with conviction. That night, as Clara mended her mother's dress by lamplight, Weston sat closer than usual. He didn't speak, didn't touch her, but his presence felt like a shield between her and the darkness outside. I won't leave, Clara said quietly. No matter what they do. I know that too, Weston replied. Question is, how do we make them know it? Clara's needle flashed in the firelight, mending what had been torn, making it whole again. We keep going, she said. We work, we live. We don't give them the satisfaction of breaking us. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside, the fire burned steady, and two people who'd found strength in each other's stubbornness settled in to wait out whatever storm might come. The storm returned in late May, unusual for the season. Clara watched through the workshop window as dark clouds piled against the mountains, remembering another storm, another night when she'd had nowhere to go. How different things were now, and yet some things remained unchanged. She was still an outsider, still fighting for her place in a world that preferred its women meek and married. The workshop roof had developed a leak during the afternoon rain. Clara positioned buckets strategically, but by evening, the drip had become a steady stream. She was attempting to patch it from inside when Weston appeared in the doorway. That's not going to hold, he observed. I'm aware. Clara stretched on tiptoes, trying to reach the damaged spot. But it's better than nothing. Come on. He jerked his head toward the main cabin. Can't work with water pouring in. Clara hesitated. Since the night with Dale Morrison, they'd been careful about appearances. She worked in her shop, he in his space, meeting only for meals and necessary conversation. Moving her work into the main cabin felt like crossing a line they'd drawn without words. The saddles will get ruined, Weston added. Bad for business. The practical argument decided her. Together, they moved her current projects into the cabin, spreading them near the fire to dry. The main room, always small, became cramped with leather goods and tools competing for space with the usual furnishings. As night fell and the storm intensified, they worked in parallel, Clara on a bridle, Weston repairing a pack saddle. The fire crackled, wind howled outside, and the familiar comfort they'd once shared slowly returned. I've been thinking, Clara said, breaking a long silence, about what Mrs. Henderson said last week. Weston looked up from his work. About the leather goods shop in Laramie. You heard that. Hard not to. She's got a voice that carries. A small smile tugged at his mouth. What about it? Clara set down her needle. She said if I wanted to set up proper, she'd back me, introduce me to suppliers, help find customers. Real shop, my name on the door. That's a good opportunity. It is. Clara picked up the needle again, not meeting his eyes. Laramie's bigger than Hollow Rock, more civilized. People might not care so much about my circumstances. Weston was quiet for a moment. When would you go? I haven't decided to go. But you're thinking about it. Shouldn't I? The words came out sharper than intended. What future do I have here? Weston, your business partner who lives in your workshop, who can't walk down Main Street without harassment. At least in Laramie. I could be just another shopkeeper. That what you want, to be just another anything? Clara's hand stilled. I want to be respected, to work without looking over my shoulder, to build something that's mine. And you can't do that here. You know I can't, not as long as people see me as... She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. As what? His voice had gone dangerously quiet. Say it. As your woman. Your kept woman who doesn't even share your bed, which somehow makes it worse in their minds, at least if we were. She trailed off, unable to finish. If we were what? Clara. The air between them crackled like the fire. Clara stood abruptly, moving to the window. It doesn't matter. Doesn't it? Weston was standing now too, though he didn't approach. You think I don't know what this costs you? Think I don't see you flinch when we go to town? Hear what people whisper? You think it's easy for me, watching you pay for my protection. I never asked for your protection. No, you never ask for anything. His voice roughened. Too proud to ask, too stubborn to take what's offered freely. Just like that first night, sitting in that barn, freezing to death rather than beg for help. And look where accepting help got me. Clara turned to face him. Trapped between worlds, not respectable enough for town, not anything enough for here. Not anything enough. Weston crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping just out of reach. You think that's how I see you? How do you see me? The question hung between them. Years of careful distance condensing into this moment. Your business partner, your charity case, your... mine. The word came out raw, honest. I see you as mine, and it terrifies me because I've got no right, no claim except what you allow. And you're right, it's not fair to you. Not fair that my wanting you makes your life harder. Clara's breath caught. You want me? Clara. Her name sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. I've wanted you since the day you stood in my kitchen, chin up, ready to work for your keep. Wanted you more when you wouldn't take charity, when you made this arrangement between equals. Want you every morning when you hum while making coffee, every evening when you lose yourself in your work. He took a shuddering breath. But wanting isn't having, and I won't be another man who takes what isn't offered. The storm outside seemed to pause, the world holding its breath. Clara took 1 step forward, then another, until she stood close enough to see the pain in his eyes, the rigid control he maintained. What if I offered? She whispered. His hands clenched at his sides. Don't, not unless you mean it, not unless... Clara reached up, her fingers touching his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin. I'm tired of being careful, Weston, tired of pretending this is just business. Clara, the workshop roof isn't the only thing that leaks, she continued, her voice stronger now. This arrangement we've built, it's been letting feelings in drop by drop. I've been trying to patch it, to keep things contained. But maybe some things aren't meant to be contained. Weston's control finally cracked. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his cheek. If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. I know. Clara's other hand found his chest, feeling his heartbeat race to match hers. But I'm tired of going back, tired of safe distances and careful boundaries. He pulled her against him then. Not kissing, just holding. Clara pressed her face into his shirt, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and wood smoke and home. His arms around her felt like the answer to a question she'd been afraid to ask. "Stay," he said into her hair. "Forget Laramie. Forget all of it. Stay here with me. Not as my business partner, not as my charity case, as my wife, if you'll have me." Clara pulled back to see his face. "Weston Hale, is that a proposal?" "It's a poor one." His smile was crooked, vulnerable. "I've got nothing to offer except a leaky workshop, a cabin that's too small, and a reputation that'll make your life harder. But I've also got 2 hands that'll work to keep you safe, a heart that's been yours since winter, and a promise that you'll never face another storm alone." "That's not nothing," Clara said softly. "That's everything." This time, when he kissed her, it tasted like coming home after a long journey. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, 2 people who'd built walls against the world finally let them fall. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Weston rested his forehead against hers. "We'll face trouble for this. The town will talk regardless." Clara's hands framed his face. "At least now they'll have something true to gossip about. And your workshop, your plans. Can't a married woman run a business?" She smiled at his expression. "Mrs. Weston Hale, proprietor of the finest leather goods in Wyoming territory. Has a nice sound to it. You'd take my name. I'd take your strength when mine fails. Give you mine when yours does. Isn't that what marriage is?" Instead of answering, he kissed her again, and Clara understood that some promises didn't need words. They were written in actions in coats given freely, in workshops built with care, in quiet evenings that became a life shared. The storm passed near dawn, leaving the world washed clean. Clara woke in the main room, wrapped in blankets on the floor near the dying fire, Weston's arm heavy across her waist. Nothing improper had happened. He'd been too careful for that, insisting on proprieties even as their world shifted, but everything had changed. "Morning," he said against her hair. "Morning." Clara turned in his arms, studying his face in the pale light. "No regrets. Only that I waited so long." His hand smoothed her hair back. "You?" "None." She meant it. Whatever came next, whatever gossip or judgment or hardship, they'd face it together. Though we should probably see about fixing that roof. Weston laughed, the sound rich and unexpected. Practical to the end. "Someone has to be. Marry me today," he said suddenly. "Reverend Mills comes through this afternoon. We could—" "Yes. You don't want to think about it." Clara smiled. "I've been thinking about it longer than you know. Yes, Weston, today." And so, as the sun climbed higher and the world steamed with fresh possibilities, 2 people who'd found each other in a storm, prepared to weather whatever might come together, honest and unafraid. The news of their impending marriage traveled faster than wildfire through dry grass. By noon, when Clara and Weston rode into town to meet Reverend Mills, it seemed half of Hollow Rock already knew. Some watched from windows. Others found reasons to loiter on the boardwalk, all waiting to see what would unfold. They'd barely dismounted at the church when a carriage pulled up, dust swirling. Clara's stomach dropped as she recognized the man stepping down her Uncle Theodore, his face thunderous beneath his traveling hat. "Clara May Rowan," he boomed, striding toward them. "What is the meaning of this disgrace?" Weston moved slightly, positioning himself between Clara and her uncle. "Sir, I don't believe we've been introduced. I am Theodore Rowan, this girl's guardian and only living relative." Uncle Theodore's cheeks were mottled red. "I received word of her. Situation here, living with a man without benefit of marriage, bringing shame upon our family name." "That situation is being rectified today," Weston said calmly, "with Reverend Mills's help." Rectified, Uncle Theodore laughed harshly. You think marriage to a common cowhand erases months of scandal? I've come to take her home where she belongs. I belong here. Clara stepped around Weston, her voice steady. This is my home now. Your home, her uncle's eyes narrowed. You had a home in Denver. You had an arrangement with a respectable man of means. You threw it all away for what, to play house with a saddle tramp. The gathering crowd murmured. Clara felt their judgment like physical weight, but she kept her chin high. Mr. Ashford threw me away, she said clearly. Left me stranded in a blizzard with nowhere to go. Weston saved my life. Saved it or ruined it? Uncle Theodore pulled a folded paper from his coat. I have here a legal declaration of guardianship. You're not yet 25. Clara, by law, you're still under my protection. Clara's breath caught. She'd forgotten in Denver. It hadn't mattered. But here, now. That's an interesting document. A new voice interrupted. Tom Martinez emerged from the crowd. Sarah Henderson beside him. Mind if I have a look? I've got some experience with legal papers. Uncle Theodore hesitated, then handed it over. Tom studied it, his expression thoughtful. This is dated 3 years ago, Tom observed. When Clara was 20, she's 23 now, if I'm not mistaken. The age of majority for women is 25 in matters of property and marriage. Uncle Theodore insisted. In Colorado, maybe. Tom smiled slightly. But this is Wyoming territory. We do things different here. Women have the vote, own property, make their own choices. Legal age of majority is 21, same as men. The crowd stirred. Clara heard someone mutter, "That's right," and another voice added, "Territory law supersedes." Uncle Theodore's face darkened further. Regardless of technicalities, I am her family. Her late father entrusted her to my care. Your care, Clara found her voice. Anger overcoming caution. You mean your convenience. You kept me as unpaid help in your household, then sold me to the highest bidder when I became inconvenient. I arranged a suitable marriage. You arranged a transaction. Money changed hands, money you kept. Clara's voice carried clear across the street. Mr. Ashford paid you for traveling expenses. Didn't he? Only I never saw a penny. I arrived here with 67 cents and the clothes on my back. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Even in a frontier town, taking money meant for a woman's welfare was considered low behavior. The workshop, Weston said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. The leather workshop is in Clara's name, built on my land, but deeded to her. Makes her a property owner in Wyoming territory. He looked at Uncle Theodore steadily. That means she's her own woman. Legally speaking, no guardianship applies. Clara stared at him. When did you... Week after we drew up the business agreement. Weston's smile was small, but real. Figured you should have something that was yours alone. Tom here witnessed the paperwork. Tom Martinez nodded. All legal and proper. Miss Rowan, soon to be Mrs. Hale, is a businesswoman of standing in our community. This is ridiculous, Uncle Theodore sputtered. A young woman, unmarried, living with her business partner. Sarah Henderson spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of respectability. I've commissioned work for Miss Rowan. Fine work, delivered promptly, whatever her living arrangements. She's conducted herself as a professional craftswoman. That's right, another voice from the crowd and the blacksmith. She fixed my good saddle when no one else could. Mended my son's chaps after he tore them on barbed wire, added a rancher's wife. One by one, voices spoke up, people who'd bought Clara's work, who'd seen her skill, who judged her by her actions rather than gossip. Not everyone. Certainly, Dale Morrison and his ilk stood silent, faces sour. But enough spoke that Uncle Theodore began to realize he'd miscalculated. Be that as it may, he tried once more. Family is family. Clara, your aunt misses you. Come home where you belong. I am home, Clara said simply. And as for family, she looked at Weston. then at the people who'd spoken for her. Family isn't just blood, it's who stands by you in storms. Reverend Mills, who'd been waiting quietly by the church door, cleared his throat. If we're quite finished with the theatrics, I have a marriage to perform, unless there are any legal impediments. Uncle Theodore looked around the crowd, finding no support. Then, back at Clara. You're making a mistake, girl. When this goes wrong and it will, don't come crying to Denver. I won't, Clara assured him. I've learned to stand on my own feet. Weston taught me that. I didn't teach you anything, Weston said quietly. You already knew. I just gave you room to remember. Uncle Theodore made a disgusted sound, climbed back into his carriage, and ordered the driver on. The crowd began to disperse. Though not quickly, a wedding was still entertainment in a small town. Inside the simple church, with Tom Martinez and Sarah Henderson as witnesses, Reverend Mills performed the ceremony. Clara wore her mended green dress, the one she'd worn when facing down Dale Morrison. Weston had put on his good shirt, the one his mother made that Clara had repaired. Do you, Clara May, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Reverend Mills asked. I do. The words came clear and certain. Do you, Weston James, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was rough with emotion. Then, by the power vested in me by Wyoming territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. When Weston kissed her, Clara heard Sarah Henderson sniffle and Tom Martinez clear his throat suspiciously. Outside, she could hear voices not all approving, but no longer unanimous in condemnation. As they signed the marriage certificate, Tom leaned over to Weston. That was a nice touch about the property deed. When did you really file it? This morning, Weston admitted quietly. Figured it might come in handy. Clara heard and turned to stare at her new husband. You went to town before dawn to file paperwork. Couldn't have your uncle dragging you away. Weston's smile was sheepish. Besides, you earned that workshop. Built your business in it. Should be yours. Legal and proper. Clara kissed him again, right there in front of God and everyone, not caring who might disapprove. They rode home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The cabin looked the same as when they'd left it, but everything felt different. Clara was no longer a guest, no longer transient. She was Mrs. Weston Hale, property owner, businesswoman, wife. No regrets, Weston asked as they unsaddled the horses. None, Clara said firmly. Though Uncle Theodore was right about one thing, this won't be easy. Dale Morrison won't suddenly respect me because I'm married. The town gossips won't stop talking. No, Weston agreed. But now they'll be talking about my wife, and that changes things. I can protect my wife in ways I couldn't protect a woman with no claim on me. I don't need your protection, Clara said automatically, then softened it with a smile. But I'll take it anyway, as long as you take mine in return. Deal, Weston said, and sealed it with a kiss that promised all the protection and partnership either of them would ever need. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and autumn painted the Wyoming mountains in shades of gold and rust. Clara's workshop had been rebuilt stronger. The roof no longer leaked, and orders came steadily from ranchers who'd learned to value quality over gossip. But tonight, as October wind rattled the windows, Clara sat by the fire mending something far more precious than Leather Weston's old coat, the one he'd given her that first bitter morning. You don't need to fix that old thing, Weston said from across the room, where he was oiling a rifle for tomorrow's hunting trip. Got better coats now. It's good wool. Shame to waste it. Clara's needle moved in steady rhythm, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd been feeling poorly for weeks now, tired in ways that work couldn't explain, and this morning, when the smell of coffee had sent her rushing outside. Clara Weston set down the rifle. You've been quiet all evening. She looked up, meeting his concerned gaze. In 6 months of marriage, They'd learn to read each other like familiar books. Just thinking. About what? Clara set down the coat, her hands unconsciously moving to her stomach. About how things change, how fast they change sometimes. Weston crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Clara took his hand, placed it gently on her belly. Everything's about to change again, that's all. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by joy and terror in equal measure. Come spring, there'll be 3 of us in this cabin. Clara watched emotions chase across his face. Unless you build another addition. Weston pulled her into his arms, careful, as if she might break. Clara, my God, Clara! Are you happy? She asked against his shoulder. Happy. He pulled back to look at her. I'm terrified, elated, proud, worried. Is that happy? Clara laughed, the sound bright in the quiet cabin. I think that's exactly happy. They sat together by the fire, planning in the way of expectant parents everywhere, names and cradles and dreams for a child not yet born. Outside, the wind grew stronger, and Clara remembered another night, another storm, when she'd had nowhere to go and nothing to hope for. I was thinking, she said softly, if it's a girl, I'd like to name her Grace, for the grace that brought me here, brought us together. And if it's a boy? Clara considered. James, after you, James Theodore, perhaps. Theodore Weston raised an eyebrow. After your uncle, he brought me here, in his way. His cruelty became my salvation. Clara traced patterns on Weston's hand. Seems fitting to take his name and make something good from it. A knock at the door interrupted them, unusual for the late hour. Weston answered cautiously, rifle within reach. Tom Martinez stood on the threshold, hat in hand. Evening. Weston, Mrs. Hale. Sorry to disturb, but thought you should know. Dale Morrison's been talking in town. Says he's got some legal claim to your land. Something about an old debt your father owed his family. Weston's face darkened. My father never owed the Morrisons anything. I know that. You know that. But Dale's got papers, or says he does. Tom shifted uncomfortably. He's been drinking, talking wild, says he'll have you off this land by week's end. After Tom left, Clara found Weston standing at the window, fists clenched. She went to him, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. We'll fight it, she said simply. With what I don't have papers going back that far. After Ma died, things got lost, burned. Then we'll find another way. Clara turned him to face her. You taught me that first night when one door closes, you make your own opening. We didn't come this far to be pushed out by Dale Morrison's lies. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Sarah Henderson arrived in her buggy, accompanied by an elderly man Clara didn't recognize. This is Judge Carlton, Sarah announced. Retired now, but he knew your father, Weston, knew him well. The old judge studied Weston with sharp eyes. You look like him. Same stubborn jaw? He pulled out a leather portfolio. I heard about Morrison's claims. Pack of lies, of course. Your father was the most honest man I knew. Can you prove it? Weston asked. Better than that. Judge Carlton smiled. I can prove Dale Morrison's father tried this same trick 20 years ago. Have the court records right here. Case was thrown out. Morrison Sr. was fined for filing false claims. He handed the papers to Weston. Seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Clara served coffee while they discussed strategy. It felt like a war council, planning how to defend their small kingdom against those who would take it. Dale won't give up easy, Tom warned. His pride's involved now. Then we'll be ready, Clara said firmly. All of us. The confrontation came 3 days later. Dale Morrison rode up with 5 men and what he claimed were legal papers. Weston met them in the yard, Clara beside him. But they weren't alone. Tom Martinez was there, along with Judge Carlton, Sarah Henderson, and a dozen cowboys who'd eaten Clara's cooking and worn her mended gear. "You're trespassing, Morrison," Weston said calmly. "This is my land now." Dale waved his papers. "My family's land, stolen by your father. Those papers are forgeries." Judge Carlton stepped forward. "Just like the ones your father tried to use. I've already sent word to the territorial marshal. He'll be very interested in this attempt at fraud." Dale's face went white, then red. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can." The judge smiled coldly. "Your father kept terrible records, but the court keeps excellent ones. Every forged document, every false claim, all documented and sealed." The men with Dale began to shift uneasily, realizing they'd been pulled into something larger than a land dispute. "This isn't over," Dale snarled. "You think you've won a saddle tramp and his wife," Clara interrupted, stepping forward. "A property owner in this territory, a businesswoman who pays taxes and employs others." She looked at the men behind Dale. "How many of you have worn gear I've mended, sat on saddles I've restored?" Several looked away, embarrassed. One actually touched his hat and mumbled, "Fine work, ma'am. You choose your battles, Mr. Morrison." Clara continued, "But choose carefully, because every person you see here has chosen to stand with us. Not from fear, not from obligation, but because we've earned their respect through honest work and fair dealing. What have you earned?" Dale looked around, seeing his support evaporate like morning mist. Without another word, he wheeled his horse and rode away, his men trailing behind. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah Henderson pressed Clara's hand. "That was well done. Your mother would be proud." That evening, as Clara worked on the old coat nearly finished, now Weston sat beside her, unusually quiet. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About Grace," he said finally. "About storms that bring strangers together, about coats given freely and received with dignity." He touched her belly gently. "About new life growing where once there was only survival." Clara set aside her sewing and took his hands. "I was just thinking, we never did have a proper wedding night. Too much excitement, then straight to work the next day." "Mrs. Hale, are you suggesting we've been doing this marriage thing backwards?" "I'm suggesting," Clara said, standing and pulling him with her, "that it's never too late to do things right." Later, as they lay entwined in the bed they now properly shared, Clara traced patterns on Weston's chest. "I want our child to know their story. All of it. The storm, the stable, the coat. How sometimes the worst night of your life leads to the best morning. And how a man too stubborn to let a woman freeze became a husband," Weston added. "And how a woman too proud to ask for help became a wife." Clara smiled in the darkness. "Though I still don't ask for help." "No," Weston agreed, pulling her closer. "You just take your half of everything and make it whole." Outside, November wind tested the walls they'd reinforced together. But inside, two people who'd found each other in a storm lay warm and safe, building a future on the foundation of a coat freely given and dignity maintained. And somewhere between sleep and waking, Clara felt the first flutter of movement in her belly, new life asserting itself. The next chapter in a story that began with nowhere to sleep and became everything worth having. The coat lay finished on the chair, good as new. Tomorrow, Weston would wear it again, but now it carried more than warmth. It carried memory, promise, and the proof that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the hardest nights. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Clara and Weston's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a thumbs up and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and survival in the Old West.